So in this video, I'm going to talk about how to write learning objectives. And the first thing that you need to remember is that your objectives must be measurable. And in order for you to create measurable learning objectives, the best thing to do is to refer to Bloom's taxonomy. So this taxonomy is a framework that was created by Benjamin Bloom in 1956 that describes different skills and abilities that students can demonstrate when learning. The skills and abilities range from lower level thinking skills, so down here on the left from knowledge and comprehension, to higher order thinking skills, so on the right, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. You can also think about the categories on the left as being simple, and the categories on the right being more complex, or the categories on the left being more concrete, and that the categories on the right are more abstract. And throughout the lesson, you want to move your students from the lower level thinking to the higher order thinking, right? So that's the direction you want to move students. So this diagram on the right is another version of Bloom's taxonomy. In 2001, a team of educators got together to rethink Bloom's taxonomy, and they created a taxonomy of learning, teaching, and assessment. So if you do Google Bloom's taxonomy, both of these versions will come up. And I won't go into too much of the history, but I'll just show you here that the synthesis category has become the creating category and is now as listed as the highest level of thinking. And then the evaluation just moved down one step. So both taxonomies are good to use. If you're just Googling them, just know you can use either one. So let's go back to the idea that objectives must be measurable. So as a teacher, you must be able to observe, hear, or read what the students are doing. And you want to be specific. So you want to avoid verbs like use, learn, and understand because those are too vague. So that's why the Blooms is an excellent way to get those specific skills and abilities that you want the students to be learning and doing in the class. So we have a hypothetical lesson plan here, and it's for an Impressionism lesson. And we'll start with the first learning objective, which is introducing the students to the content of the lesson. So here I have as LL in the red, these are the lower level thinking skills that I want the students to exhibit. And I'm thinking, well, what verbs can I use, right? So I want to go to the Blooms, right, and think, well, what will my activity be like? We're going to be looking at and discussing Impressionist paintings. So perhaps I want the students to define, but I also want them to describe, and you'll notice describe is in both categories, these the characteristics that make up Impressionist paintings, right? So students define and describe what makes an Impressionist painting by looking and discussing. So that's the first activity that we start with. So now in this lesson, we'll go to the next activity that we'll do. And in this activity, students will be practicing the different techniques used in Impressionist painting, right? Whether that be mark making, impasto, or optical mixing. And they'll be focusing on the process. And so I want my verbs to be in the lower level categories, but maybe moving towards the higher order categories because we're progressing along in the lesson. So I go to back to my Bloom's taxonomy and I look in the categories of comprehension and application because I do want them to practice. Right? And so I see in comprehension the word identify, I'm going to use that, and then practice in application. So I just plug those in. So students identify and practice the different techniques used in Impressionist painting. Right? So now we want to go to the third learning objective. And again, we want to use a higher order verb here because students really are, again, progressing in the lesson, right? And you're moving them towards creating and synthesizing. So let's go back to the blooms. And in this category, we're using the synthesis category, but it could also be the create category. So we'll look down and we can use really any of these verbs: design, create, construct, compose. But I'm just going to click or go with design. Right? So students design an impressionist inspired landscape painting. So what you may be noticing now, as I've described the three objectives, is that the first objective started with the introductory activity that we did. The second objective moved on to a practice activity. And the third objective is sort of that main project in the lesson. So the last learning objective is students reflecting on their work. So I tell my students to always look in the evaluation category, and this will give an opportunity for students to be able to reflect on their work and talk about their own process and talk about their own thinking and what they did, right, as a result of their understanding. So I'm going to look back again at the evaluation category, right? And I'm just going to actually pick the word evaluate. It could also be explain. Maybe they had to justify some of their choices, but we'll go back to evaluate and put that here. So students will evaluate their finished painting, focusing on process. So they're focusing on mark making, impasto, optical mixing, and I added composition here because that is something that I would teach when I'm teaching them about design. So those are the 4 learning objectives. So just to review, objectives follow the order of your lesson. You want to use blooms to create the objectives. So the assessments must be measurable. And you want to avoid using verbs like use, understand, or learn. And then your objectives, right? The first 1 or 2 are going to be taken from the lower level learning categories from Bloom's. The second or third objectives are taken from the higher learning level categories, right? And there could be some overlap with objective 2. And then objective 4 is about reflection. So always take the verb from the evaluate category, right? So if you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll be creating a video for using these objectives and creating your assessment using these objectives. So watch the next video and you'll understand how to use these objectives for your assessment.